Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
I'm Indy Nidell.
And I'm Burns.
And this is the Baseball History Time Machine.
So let's go.
In a second, I just want to remind everyone that they can get this content ad-free by joining us at patreon.com. Just look for Baseball History Time Machine. And the more support we get there, the more we can focus on doing this to the detriment of our other work.
Which is the goal.
Yes. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about 1968.
Also known as the year of the pitcher.
Very much so, and really a watershed year in baseball history. The last year before divisional play, the last year we had a 30-game winner, a league that had exactly one player who hit above 290.
And the last year we had a pitcher with an ERA close to 1. And that is some feat.
Well, a starting pitcher. We do get relievers down around there and even lower sometimes.
Don Drysdale set the consecutive scoreless innings record in 1968 too, didn't he?
He did, and we'll get to that. I have a lot to cover.
And Denny McLain and Bob Gibson were unanimous Cy Young Award winners to boot.
Yes, they were. And they were both MVPs too, although only one of them was a unanimous MVP.
Which one?
I will get to there too. Patience. Today, I really want to talk about only half of 1968.
Only half?
Yep, the first half. I want to focus there.
Okay, what's the story with that then?
Well, let me start by saying the stats for the season in general are pretty nuts. Pretty much the opposite of the greatest hitters year for the 20th century.
Which was?
1930.
What happened in 1930 then?
Okay, sidetrack accepted. In 1930, the National League had a batting average of 303.
The league as a whole?
Yep. So if you hit exactly 300, you were a below average hitter in 1930. So every single hitter in the AL in 1968 would be below average in 1930 if they had the same batting average.
Wow, that's really high. Like, what was the distribution like? Give me some numbers.
The Reds and the Braves both hit 281 as teams in 1930, but the other 6 National League teams all had batting averages of over 300.
And who had the highest amongst them?
The Giants, who hit 319.
319 is pretty nuts. Did they win the pennant?
No, actually, they only finished in 3rd place. The Phillies were even crazier. They hit 315 as a team and finished dead last. 40 games out of first place and with 102 losses.
How is that even possible? Like, as a GM, you must be fuming.
Well, the pitching, right? See, the league ERA was 4.97. But a big part of the reason it was so high was Philadelphia. 3 teams had ERAs above league average. The Reds a bit above at 5.08. The Pirates a third of a point above at 5.24, and they had a record of over 500 in spite of that. And the Philadelphia Phillies with a team ERA of a whopping 6.71.
Geez, 6.71 as a team, is that like the worst record ever?
It's the record for National League, American League, Federal League, American Association, Players League, and Union Association going all the way back to 1876. It's trickier with the Negro Leagues since they played shorter seasons with uneven numbers of games. So there are some teams that played like 60-game schedules who have higher team ERAs. But outside the Negro Leagues, it is the highest team ERA ever. But do you know whose record for worst team ERA the 1930 Phillies beat?
I'm going to guess the 1899 Cleveland Spiders, since they are often regarded as the worst baseball team of all time.
Well, you guessed wrong, my friend, because there is one team other than the 1930 Phillies who actually also had a worse ERA than the 1899 Cleveland Spiders.
Unbelievable.
It is true, though. The Spiders' ERA that year was only 6.37, which is only the 3rd worst team ERA of all time. I'll give you another guess. Now, think it through. Use logic. The team with the worst ERA ever after the 1930 Phillies is...
The 1931 Phillies?
No, the 1929 Phillies, but that was close, right? And their ERA was 6.38.
So the 1929 and 1930 Phillies basically had the worst pitching ever. Talk about the Great Depression in terms of pitching.
Well, okay, they did play in Baker's Bowl, which was a real hitter's park, and I'll talk about that in an episode about ballparks.
Well, tell me about the 1930 Phillies then.
Sure, but this episode is supposed to be about 1968.
Let's do the Phillies first. I'm real curious about how bad this team actually was back then.
Okay, their pitching staff, featured Phil Collins.
You mean the Easy Glover?
Oh man, that was bad. But yeah, I did actually do. Seriously, Phil Collins, the pitcher, was their ace that year, going 16-11, and with a better than league average ERA of 4.78.
Yeah, that's a pretty bad ERA, even with a record of 16-11.
It does go downhill from there. Their number 2 starter, Ray Benj, had a not awful record of 11-15, but a 5.70 ERA to go with it. But numbers 3 and 4, Les Sweetland and Claude Weeping Willie Willoughby, went 7-15 and 4-17 with 7.71 and 7.59 ERAs.
Weeping Willie, I see why they were last place.
The 1930 Phillies did score an average of just over 6 runs per game, but they gave up an average of 7.62.
So lots of unearned runs then too, huh?
Yep, 150 unearned runs exactly, which was also the most in the league.
But if they scored 6 runs per game, their hitting must have been insane. You said 315 team batting average.
Yeah, second to the Giants.
What were some of the standout individual hitting numbers like then?
Lefty O'Doul, who won the 1929 batting title at 398, hit 383 in 1930. Third baseman Pinky Whitney hit 342. The catcher hit 313. The utility guy hit 341. But the best hitter on the 1930 Phillies was Chuck Klein.
So how did Chuck Klein do?
In 1930, Chuck Klein, who played in a league-leading 156 games in a 154-game season, since the Phillies had 2 extra inning games against the Cubs that were tied when it got dark. Playing every single game, Chuck Klein had a mammoth year. He hit for a 386 average with 250 hits, 40 homers, and 170 RBI, and a 687 slugging percentage. And do you know which of those he led the league in?
Well, since you ask it like that, I'm going to say none.
Yep, none of them. That is how much of a hitter's year 1930 was. Bill Terry hit 401, the last time a National Leaguer hit 400, and tied the National League record with 254 hits, which O'Doul actually set in 1929. And Brooklyn's Babe Herman hit 393. So Klein only finished third in the batting race at 386. As for homers, RBI, and slugging, well, Chicago's Hack Wilson easily topped the competition, setting the National League record of 56 home runs and setting the Major League record with 191 RBI, which we used to think was 190, but it's actually 191, which is still very much the record today. Wilson also slugged .723, which was the second highest National League mark ever at the time. So Klein's 40 homers and 170 RBI were a pretty distant second in the league.
That's pretty far behind and a lot of wasted effort. And those numbers are pretty crazy themselves.
Well, wasted effort. It wasn't. Well, they did finish in last place, actually. So, yeah, I suppose you're. I'd like to see an interview with Klein where he talked about how he felt like, hey, you hit 386, drove in 170 runs, finished in last place. Okay, well, Wilson led the National League in homers in 1926, 27, and 28. But Klein, in his first full season in 1929, not only topped Wilson in homers 43-39, but that 43 was the National League record at the time.
And didn't Wilson demolish that record the next year with 56 homers, and then Klein led the league in nothing in 1930?
Well, that's not true. He did have 158 runs scored.
It's a lot of runs.
And that led the league. And he also had 59 doubles, which led the league, and 445 total bases, which not only led the league, but is 4th all time.
It's a pretty good year.
Chuck Klein had other good years besides 1930, though. He only had 6 seasons in his career with over 500 at-bats, but he topped 400 total bases 3 times. And get this, in 1933, he won the Triple Crown with the much lower totals than 1930 of a 368 average, 28 homers, and 128 RBIs. He was only second in the MVP voting that year, but he won it in 1932.
I mean, that's a big drop. It's not completely off a cliff, but so by that metric, you can say that 1930 was a hitter's year, or the best year for hitting.
Well, it was the best year for hitting post-1900, but that is also another story for another day.
So hang on, was this only in the National League? How was the American League in 1930?
Not quite as extreme, though the league ERA was 4.65. The Yankees hit 3.09 as a team, which topped the league, but they only finished in 3rd place, 16 games behind the Philadelphia A's and 8 behind the Washington Senators.
So let me get this straight. Philadelphia had the best American League team and the worst National League team in 1930.
Yes, they did. And the A's drew more than twice as many fans to the games.
I'm not surprised.
Okay, I'm going to change the subject back to 1968 now.
You're not going to talk about the AL sluggers of 1930, are you?
No, because it was guys like Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Jimmy Fox, Al Simmons, and like that. And I want to soon have an episode about sluggers of the 1930s, so I will save it for then. I just wanted to explain what a monster hitter's year 1930 was. The NL had 9 guys, who hit 366 or better. And the AL had 8 guys over 350. Contrast that with 1968, when the National League had 5 300 hitters, and the American League had Carl Yastrzemski.
That's all?
Yep, and not only that, Yaz hit just 301, and no one else hit above 290 in the whole AL. This was Yaz's 3rd batting title, but he only managed it by hitting 378 the final month of the season. He was only hitting 285 at the end of August.
So weird to think of a season with no above 300 hitters. Though I guess in 2024 there were only 4 in the American League and 3 in the National League.
Hey, fun fact, and yes, you're right, fun fact. In 1961, you'll like my fun fact. In 1961, Norm Cash led the AL in hitting at 361, right? He later admitted he used a corked bat that year, which may or may not have a benefit to hitting, but he sure believed it did. And I mention that because in no other year of the 1960s, from 1960 to 1969, did any American leaguer reach 333 or 1 hit every 3 at-bats.
Not a single soul?
None of them. Tony Oliva finally hit 337 in 1971 to end the drought, but the lack of hitting was way worse in the AL than in the NL in the 1960s.
So I guess that's why the AL got a designated hitter.
That is true. It was proposed already in 1969, but it took some time to get approval. The maximum height of the mound was lowered to try to beef up offense after 1968.
Wait, don't they call that the Gibson rule? But Bob Gibson pitched in the National League or the NL.
It's gotten that name over the years, but it wasn't initially known as that. And it doesn't quite make sense because, again, the big problem was in the American League. The AL hit just 230 as a league in 1968, the lowest league average ever, and 1 point lower than Hod Ford hit in 1930, which was the worst individual average in the National League that year. In case people are wondering, Hod is a nickname for Horace. It was quite popular in the 20s and 30s. Like the pitcher Hod Lisenby was probably the most famous Hod. I don't know any Horaces today,
no.
But if I meet any, I'm going to call him a Hod and see if they go by it.
There's Horace Grant, who played for the Bulls.
You mean Hod Grant?
yeah, Hod Grant, but that's basketball. That's a different story.
Okay. Hod Ford, the lowest National League individual average in 1930. The National League, though, hit 243 in 1968, the 6th lowest National League average ever. The AL was declining, though. From 1965 to 1968, they hit, as a league, 242, 240, 236, and 230. And those last two are the lowest 2 ever for the American League. And 1965 and 66 were the 8th and 5th lowest ever. The Major League average in 1968 was 237, which is the lowest in history. So something had to change somewhere. It very much was the year of the pitcher.
Okay, so now we're finally going to talk about the pitching of 1968.
And now I finally am, and there is a bunch to talk about.
Are you going to start with Bob Gibson and Denny McLain?
I am now, since you mentioned them. As any school child knows, Denny McLain went 31-6 for the Tigers, the last 30-game winner. And Bob Gibson went a respectable 22-9 for the Cardinals, but also threw 13 shutouts and had a 1.12 ERA.
Is that the lowest ever?
No, but it is the lowest in over 100 years as of 2025, and either the 5th or the 3rd lowest of the 20th century, depending on how you look at it.
What do you mean by that, though?
Dutch Leonard's 0.96 in 1914 and Three Finger Brown's 1.04 in 1906 are recognized today as official, and they are lower than Gibson's. But Babe Adams's 1.11 in 1909 and Ferdy Shoup's 0.90 for real, in 1916 are not, since under current rules to lead the league, they didn't pitch 1 inning per each official game the team had, meaning that in, a 154-game season, a guy would have to pitch 154 total innings to qualify. And Adams and Shoup didn't, although that is not what counted to qualify back then.
That's interesting. So what did count back then?
ERA was introduced as an official stat in 1912. So Adams was retroactive anyhow. As a Pittsburgh rookie in 1909, Babe Adams went 12-3 with a 1.11 ERA.
Holy crap. That's some rookie season.
And he topped that off by winning 3 games in the 1909 World Series versus the Tigers.
Holy crap again. Hey, that's 2 babes you've mentioned today, Herman and Adams.
Adams was the first star called Babe, though there were a couple earlier guys with a nickname who, didn't really have stellar careers. Babe Adams pitched in 25 games in 1909, but only started 12 of them and pitched 130 innings. Under the National League ERA rules from 1912 to 1916, which counted only how many appearances you had, he would have qualified for the ERA title. Then in 1917, the National League adopted 10 complete games as the criterion, and then in 1951, the modern, number of innings thing.
10 complete games in a season is kind of crazy. Like, no one would have qualified in 2024.
You know what? Since the year 2000, only James Shields in 2011 would have qualified for any of the ERA titles if it was still 10 complete games in a season. He had 11 that year for the Rays.
Okay, but wait, hang on. Tell me about, what's his name, Ferdy Schlupp.
Ferdy Schlupp, yeah. In a bunch of old baseball books that I had when I was a kid, Ferdy Schlupp was listed as the all-time single-season ERA record holder for his 0.90 ERA for the Giants in 1916.
0.90 is insanity. That's nearly a quarter of a point better than Gibson's.
It is, and until after World War II, it was considered the record. But the criterion changed, and, well, that's the way it goes. But consider this. It was 52 years between Schlupp's and Gibson's great years. And it's 57 from Gibson to now, right?
All right.
I remember baseball stuff from the 1970s. I watched it happen. But stuff from 100 years ago is the stuff of legend. And I say this because in 1968, there were plenty of people around who'd seen Schlupp, Leonard, Adams, and Brown play. So a 1.12 ERA was within living memory, which makes it less impressive than it might otherwise be to someone like us, right? Which partly explains why Gibson was not a unanimous MVP in 1968. He got 14 out of 20 votes.
Who got the other 6 then?
Pete Rose, who won the batting title at .335.
Which is more than 1 hit per 3 at-bats.
It is. The National League had a bunch of guys in the 1960s who had more than 1 hit every 3 at-bats, or seasons with that. Roberto Clemente, Cleon Jones, Tony Gonzalez, Rusty Staub, Kurt Flood, Matty Alou, Tommy Davis, Frank Robinson, Veda Pinson.
And 0 in the AL that whole decade except for Norm Cash.
And his corked bat. So yeah, Rose got a lot of MVP votes. And Denny McLain was a unanimous AL MVP because back then, wins were considered more important than ERA or shutouts.
Wait, so Gibson had 13 shutouts in 1968, right? Was that the NL record for that time?
No. Grover Alexander, whose friends call him Dode, if you remember from last week, had 16 shutouts in 1916. And he did it for the Phillies, pitching in that hitter-friendly Baker Bowl, which again
was within living memory.
Right. Alex also had 12 in 1915, so he had 28 shutouts over 2 straight seasons. And Sandy Koufax and Dean Chance had just had 11 each in 1963 and 1964. It wasn't really until the 1980s when Gibson's ERA and shutouts total began to be more impressive to everyone than Denny McLain's wins.
Which is still pretty impressive.
It is, and there was a huge media hoopla when he was going for number 30, with Dizzy Dean, the last 30-game winner before that in 1934, on hand to congratulate Denny McLain. And then, of course, Gibson and McLain had the big face-off in the World Series, which I will talk about another time soon when I talk about great World Series pitchers.
So Gibson and McLain defined the year of the pitcher then.
But they didn't, and that's what I want to get to here. It's not just them, or even a league average ERA of below 3. In the National League, there were 185 shutouts in 1,626 games. That's 11.3% of the games somebody was shut out. And I'll tell you this, there were so many good pitchers that neither Bob Gibson nor Denny McLain started the All-Star game.
Nah, you're gonna have to explain.
I'm going to give you some stats without names, right?
Okay.
These are some pitcher stats at the start of July 1968. One guy was 13-5 with a 1.11 ERA and 7 shutouts. One guy was 10-4 with a 1.21 ERA and 7 shutouts. One guy was 9-5 with a 1.14 ERA and 5 shutouts, and none of those guys are Denny McLain.
That's crazy. It kind of sounds made up, like some stat you can only achieve by playing a modern video game.
But it's true. The first 2 of those guys, who have slightly better numbers than number 3, were Luis Tiant and Don Drysdale. And they were the starters of the All-Star game. Drysdale, as we know, threw 6 straight shutouts and 58 straight scoreless innings.
58 and 2/3.
Sorry, 58 and 2/3. Tiant actually threw 4 straight shutouts early in the season, and Drysdale's streak was in May and early June.
So hang on. So Gibson only had 5 shutouts at the beginning of July and ended the season with 13 shutouts.
Yeah, he finished June with 5 shutouts in a row, his first ones of the season, to lower his ERA from 1.66 to 1.14, and then in July threw 3 more shutouts and 3 one-run games. His June streak was 47.2 scoreless innings before he let in a run with a wild pitch, and then he threw 19 more scoreless innings before the Astros scored once off him, and then 21 more scoreless innings.
That's stuff of legends. I mean, that run is so insane. Even after he gave up the odd run here and there, to go a bunch of innings scoreless again, like 2 consecutive times afterwards.
It's only 2 odd runs in all that time. Thing is, in 1968, Bob Gibson was clearly the best pitcher in baseball the second half of the season, but not really the first, and people forget that. Tiant had 4 more wins, 2 more shutouts, and a lower ERA at the end of June than Gibson did. Tiant and Drysdale couldn't keep it up after the start of July, though. Tiant did end up 21-9 for the season, and he led the AL with a 1.60 ERA, which is actually still the best American League ERA the last 100 years. Drysdale went just 4-8 the rest of the season to go 14-12 and had a 2.15 ERA when it ended.
So McLain had what as an ERA?
McLain was 16-2 with a 2.09 ERA at the All-Star break and finished 31-6, 196. I should point out that the All-Star game was won 1-0 by the National League, who got only 5 hits, and the AL got only 3. The lone run was by Willie Mays on a single, pickoff error, a walk, and a wild pitch by Tiant, and then Mays scored on a double play ball. Mays was batting leadoff. But what I really wanted to talk about today, right, are the other All-Star pitchers of 1968.
All right, so not really one of those All-Star games for people who don't appreciate stellar pitching. So after all of that, we're getting to what we actually wanted to talk about.
That's going to happen a lot in these episodes, so people should get used to this. I want to show how they were in the first half compared to the second half, because other than Bob Gibson, it was really the first half of 1968 that was the year of the pitcher.
All right, let's get into this. Shoot.
The National League All-Stars also had Steve Carlton, who had 4 shutouts by the break, though a relatively high 2.67 ERA. But a month earlier, it was 2 even. There was Woody Fryman, whom I remember from the Expos in the late 70s, though you've likely never heard of him. He finished the year for the Phillies at 12-14 with a 2.78 ERA.
Well, compared to everything else, that's relatively mediocre.
Yeah, but he had a 1.97 ERA as July began. It was just 1.61 in mid-June and 4 shutouts. There was Jerry Koosman, who, despite a long and mostly excellent career in which he won 223 games and nearly won a Cy Young Award, was only ever an All-Star in 1968 and 1969. Woody Fryman was also a 2-time All-Star. But Koosman was a rookie in 1968 and finished the year 19-12, 208.
That's some rookie season.
He was 11-3, 185 at the start of July.
Also with 4 shutouts?
Only 3. His ERA was down to just 1.42 in mid-June, though. I'm not certain when they chose the pitchers for the All-Star game that year, but it feels like it would be around then. Koosman's teammate Tom Seaver was also a National League All-Star. His stats were more mundane. He was 7-5, but with a 1.91 ERA at the end of June.
That's still pretty amazing. That's a really low ERA. How did they get the ERA so low?
Well, he finished the season at 2.20. Ron Reed finished the season 11-10 with a 3.35 ERA, which was a bunch higher than the league average ERA. But at the end of June, he had an 8-4 record, which got him his only All-Star appearance, even with a 2.91 ERA. And the last National League All-Star pitcher is Juan Marichal, the Giants star, the Giants ace, who led the National League in wins that year, going 26-9, and also in complete games and innings with 30 complete games and 325.2 innings pitched.
So how did Marichal go for the first few months?
On July 2nd, he was 15-3, 251.
What about the American League?
Okay, there was Tommy John before he had Tommy John surgery. At the end of June, he was a perfect 7-0 with a 158 ERA, which is amazing, and he finished the season 10-5, 198. Sudden Sam McDowell, who finished the season with a 181 ERA and a major league leading 283 strikeouts, had a 155 ERA at the break, though he was just 8-8. Boston's Gary Bell started the season relieving, but they soon gave him starting assignments, and he threw 3 shutouts and got his ERA down to 2 for a while. Blue Moon Odom was also an American League All-Star, 7-4, 192 at the end of June, which went up to 245 by the end of the year.
Blue Moon Odom. That has to be the best name we've heard so far.
We got some cool ones coming up in the next couple episodes. We'll do a nicknames episode. Jose Santiago was 9-4 with a 2.18 ERA at the end of June, but only pitched in 2 more games the rest of the season. He actually only gave up 14 hits in his first 4 games, but got tendonitis in his arm, and, well, that was it. And finally, Mel Stottlemyre, who was 11-5, 229 at the break.
I'm really overwhelmed by these numbers because that is crazy amount of pitchers who had a really good first half of the season.
The National League had 10 pitchers for the year with ERAs below 250, though other than Gibson, only Bobby Bolin at 199 was below 2. The AL, however, had 5 pitchers below 2 for the season. Tiant, John, McDowell, McClain, and Dave McNally, who had a 2.11 ERA at the All-Star break and didn't make the team. He was only 8-6 then, and he went 14-2 the rest of the year to go 22-8.
So some guys were good second halvers, you could say.
Yeah, some were, sure. Stan Bonson, who was the American League Rookie of the Year in 1968, was 7-3, 212 at the end of June, but also did not get the call. And he finished the year 17-12, 205 ERA. I'm going to stop now because this could go on.
This is really the year of the pitcher.
Especially the first half.
Especially the first.
So today was really an homage to those guys who made it the year of the pitcher. Bob Gibson, Louis Tiant, Denny McClain, Don Drysdale, and the rest.
And an homage to the 1930 Phillies.
An homage to them too. To the worst pitching staff of them all. Okay, well that is all for today.
This was fun.
This very much was. But we will be back next week with more super nerdy stuff.
So what is on the schedule for next week?
Well, why not do Sluggers of the 1930s?
Sure, why not?
All right then. From me, Indy Nidell.
And me, Burns.
Goodbye for now from the Baseball History Time Machine. And once again, join us on Patreon, where we'll eventually have more perks other than free ad content, but we'll be able to make a zillion more of these episodes, if you do, because they do take some time to write. All right, rock on.